When I first arrived in Minatomura, I thought I had stepped into a painting. Everything was too still, too green, too damn perfect. The rice paddies shimmered like glass under the sun, framed by jagged hills in the distance and tiny birds that darted just above the water like thoughts flitting across a calm mind. It didn't feel real. Coming from the cracked pavement and damp sweat of Tokyo, the village was an entirely different world, quiet in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I'd accepted the teaching contract on a whim. Burnout, a breakup, and too many nights spent drinking alone in a cramped apartment had me ready to vanish. The prefecture didn't matter. I just wanted somewhere with air I didn't have to share, somewhere with space to think, or maybe forget. The local board of education placed me in a small wooden house just off a road that didn't even have a name on Google Maps. It smelled like old tatami and cedar, and when the wind picked up you could hear it breathe. No AC, no dryer, and the washing machine had a rusted dial that clicked with every rotation. Still, I didn't mind. The village was so quiet I could hear the frogs at night. The locals nodded politely when I passed, and the school was barely a 5-minute bike ride away. It was peaceful, unnaturally so. They called me Gabriel Sensei, which made me feel like a fraud. My Japanese was functional at best, and my students seemed more amused than educated most days. But the job came with a decent stipend and the promise of solitude. That was enough. During my second week, one of the older teachers, Mr. Tanaka, a stern man with a mouth that looked perpetually sour, offered to walk me part of the way home. We talked about the weather, the school's summer festival, and the nearby river that flooded last year. Then, as we passed a fork in the road near 2 rice paddies, he stopped. "This way," he said, pointing to the longer, well-lit road that looped around. I motioned toward the narrower path. "Isn't this shorter?" He hesitated. "Yes, but don't take it." I blinked. "Why not?" He glanced behind us, then at the fading sun, then back to the road. "It is called Widow's Lane," he said quietly. "You should not walk there, especially alone." That was all he gave me. No explanation, no elaboration, just that look like he expected me to already understand. Then he turned and left me standing there. That night I asked Mrs. Hoshino, the sweet old woman who ran the local corner shop, about it while buying an instant curry and a can of chuhai. "Ah," she said, slowly placing my change into my hand. "You are near that path?" "Yes. Tanaka-sensei said I shouldn't use it." She gave a small, polite nod. "It is very old, older than the road. There is a story. I don't know all of it." "What kind of story?" Mrs. Hoshino looked toward the open door of her shop, as if making sure no one else was around. Then she leaned in, close enough that I smelled green tea on her breath. "If a man walks Widow's Lane alone, and he sees her, he must not look. Not even once. Her, she is in black, always black, pale as milk. If you see her and you acknowledge her, she follows you home." I tried not to laugh, but it came out anyway. "You mean like a ghost?" Her lips thinned. She looked hurt. "It is not a joke. I didn't mean to offend you." She waved it off with a stiff motion and handed me a wrapped rice cracker. "For protection," she said, "just in case." It was silly, I told myself walking home. Just old village superstition. Every rural town has one. Back in the States, it was stories about hitchhiking ghosts, haunted bridges, and crying babies in the woods. I'd read enough Creepypasta in college to know the structure. Someone sees something, ignores a rule, and things start going wrong. Still, the path looked different now. Even in daylight, Widow's Lane felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned in unnaturally close or how the air seemed heavier there. The dirt was darker. The grass didn't rustle the same. It was just a path between rice paddies, only a couple 100 meters long. But I never saw anyone else take it. I never even saw footprints in the dirt. I stuck to the longer road for the first 2 weeks, mostly out of habit. But the days got hotter, and the long route wrapped around a cluster of fields that reeked of fertilizer. Mosquitoes swarmed there, especially at dusk. It was only a matter of time before I started eyeing the shortcut again. The warnings were in the back of my mind, but they felt theatrical. Nothing had happened. No white-clad ghost, no curses. Just a quiet village and a shortcut that nobody used. I figured people avoided it because of tradition, not fear. A few of my third-year students brought it up one afternoon. We were doing an exercise where they asked me questions in English. "Sensei, have you seen the widow yet?" I laughed. "No, not yet. Should I be worried?" The three girls at the front table whispered something in Japanese. One of them drew a little stick figure in black with a veil. She held it up and said, "She walks slow, but never stops." The boys chuckled. One made a spooky woo sound. I played along, but I noticed that none of them actually laughed. The heat hit a new peak that weekend. My AC unit gave up completely, wheezing hot air no matter what setting I tried. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I was soaked in sweat and in a foul mood. I'd gone into town to buy groceries and stayed too long at the station's vending machines, sipping cold tea and scrolling through social media just to feel connected to the world I'd left behind. The sun dipped low as I pedaled back. I reached the familiar fork in the road, sweat dripping down the back of my neck. The long way meant another 15 minutes through thick air and mosquito clouds. The short way was empty. No wind, no sound. I sat there for a while, straddling my bike, staring down that darkening lane. Nothing moved, no figures in the distance, no pale woman in black. Just the tight corridor of trees and the narrow dirt path ahead. I felt stupid for hesitating. I wasn't a child. It was a story, a village story. I started pedaling. The air changed as soon as I passed between the rice paddies. It got cooler, but not in a relieving way. The kind of cool that made sweat turn clammy. My tires made a soft crunch against the dirt. My breath sounded too loud. Halfway through, I slowed. The shadows from the trees ahead stretched long across the path, and the rice paddies on either side were perfectly still. No frogs, no birds, just the soft ticking of my bicycle chain. I felt it before I saw it, that tight sensation like someone was behind me, watching. I stopped the bike, waited. Then, slowly, I turned my head. She was far off, maybe 30 meters behind, right at the start of the path. I don't know how I hadn't seen her before. She wasn't moving, just standing still. She wore a black kimono. Her hands were folded in front of her, white as bone, and a thin veil covered her face. Even from that distance, I could tell her skin was pale, almost glowing in the dusk. She didn't speak, didn't move. I turned back around. My throat was dry. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I started pedaling again, faster this time, the sound of my tires hissing against gravel. I didn't look back again, not until I reached the road on the other side. When I turned then, the path was empty, but the cold didn't leave me. I didn't sleep well that night. Even after I'd reached the safety of the main road, after my house was locked and the lights were on, I couldn't shake the image of her, the pale figure, the black kimono, the way she just stood there like she'd always been there, like the world had quietly arranged itself around her. I kept telling myself it was a prank, maybe some old villager in costume playing along with the legend, maybe one of the students pulling a joke on the foreigner. It was a plausible explanation, one I repeated enough times to almost believe it. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the veil, thin and trembling in the breeze. The next day at school, I was distracted. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see her in the distance. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but my eyes scanned the horizon anyway. After classes ended, I stayed late to clean up and prepare next week's lessons. I told myself it was just for productivity's sake, but I knew I was putting off the walk home. When I finally left, the sun was already low. The air smelled like dust and rain, and the sky wore that bruised color dusk always brings. I reached the fork in the road again. I didn't stop this time. I told myself if I turned around now, I'd just be feeding her. Besides, nothing had happened. I made it home the night before without incident. She was gone when I looked back. Maybe it was just someone passing through, or something I imagined in the fading light. I gripped the handlebars of my bike tighter and pedaled onto the dirt path. It felt different this time, quieter, not peaceful quiet, sterile. There was no sound, not even the buzz of cicadas, just the soft crunch of gravel under my tires and my own breathing. The first stretch of the path was uneventful, just the narrow road between two paddies, shadowed by trees that arched overhead like ribs. I passed the halfway point. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I kept my gaze forward. Then came the sound. It was soft at first, like dry leaves brushing against one another. Then it became clearer. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, matching my pace behind me. One step for every few rotations of my wheels. I didn't want to look. Every nerve in my body screamed to keep going, but curiosity has its own voice, and sometimes it whispers louder than fear. I braked and turned my head. There she was again, closer than before, 15 meters behind me, no more. She hadn't made a sound when she appeared, no rustle, no shuffle, no cry. She was just there, like she'd been walking behind me all along. Same black funeral kimono, the fabric draping heavily across her arms. Same pale skin, whiter than bone. Her veil was thinner this time. I could almost make out the curve of her jaw beneath it. She didn't move, didn't tilt her head, didn't acknowledge me at all, but her presence filled the space between us like cold water. I turned away quickly and began pedaling again. Harder, faster. The gravel spit out behind me as my tires bit into the dirt. My breath hitched. I didn't dare look back again. My ears strained for any sound, but I heard nothing, not even my own heartbeat. When I reached the end of the path and burst onto the paved road, I nearly lost control of the bike. I skidded, caught myself, and kept going. My legs didn't stop until I reached my house. I fumbled with the key and slammed the door behind me, locking it twice. I stood in the entryway, sweating, panting, every muscle rigid. My hand rested on the doorframe as I tried to steady myself. Nothing followed. The silence inside the house was familiar, safe. I made tea, showered, sat down in front of the fan, told myself again, prank, hallucination, heat exhaustion. But a part of me knew. I'd looked back. I'd seen her again, and she had been closer. The next few days, I avoided the path. I took the long road no matter how hot it was, no matter how late I stayed at school. Every time I passed that fork, I felt her presence lingering like the aftertaste of a bitter tea. The trees at the mouth of Widow's Lane seemed to lean further inward, shading the path in a permanent twilight. I wanted to talk about it with someone, anyone, but every time I brought up the name, I was met with silence or polite avoidance. One morning, I mentioned it to Mr. Tanaka while we both waited for the copier. "Have you ever walked Widow's Lane?" I asked casually. He didn't look at me. "No, why not?" He paused, then turned slowly. "Because I do not need to. That's it. It is not a path for walking. It is a place for mourning. Leave it to her." I didn't press him further. At night, I began hearing things, soft, deliberate sounds, a shift of weight on the wooden deck outside, the low creak of a door I was sure I'd closed. Twice I found the sliding screen near the garden partially open when I woke. I chalked it up to the wind. Maybe I hadn't latched it properly, but I started locking everything, even interior doors. It helped a little, gave me the illusion of control. But the feeling of being watched never left. Sometimes I'd look up from grading papers and feel the hairs on my arms rise, as if someone was just behind me, waiting. Other times I'd sit on the porch in the early evening, beer in hand, and let my eyes scan the distant rice paddies. And sometimes I could have sworn I saw a black shape standing too still, too far off to be sure. But when I blinked, it was always gone. By the end of that week, my paranoia had dulled into routine. I avoided the path, kept my head down, went to work, came home. The fear hadn't gone away exactly. It had just folded itself into my days, like a bad joint you learn to walk on. Then Sunday came. It was hot again, the kind of sticky, unbearable heat that clings to you like wet fabric. I'd run out of groceries and convinced myself I'd be fine if I left early in the afternoon and came back before dusk. I stayed out longer than planned. The tiny convenience store near the station had just gotten a shipment of my favorite drinks, and I wasted time browsing the aisles like I was back in the city. I missed that feeling. AC, fluorescent lights, the subtle hum of appliances, normalcy. By the time I got back on my bike, the sky was already losing its color. I hesitated again at the fork. It was stupid, I knew, but I felt it, a tightness in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes. The long road meant riding in the dark. The short path was just a few hundred meters. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself I'd keep my eyes forward no matter what I heard. I told myself it was fine. And I turned onto Widow's Lane. The air was thick. The tree branches reached across like grasping arms. The rice paddies on either side were silent and black, glassy with the reflection of the dimming sky. I kept my head down. Every pedal forward felt heavier. And then a sound, soft, dry, like a foot dragging across dirt. Behind me, I closed my eyes as I rode, just for a second. When I opened them, I focused on the end of the path, the gravel, the trees beyond. Another footstep, closer now. My heart thudded in my throat. I clenched the handlebars, willing my legs to keep moving. Then, despite everything, I looked back. I don't know why. I didn't mean to. It was just a flicker, a reflex. She was closer, 10 meters this time, veil fluttering, arms still, hands folded at her waist. She made no sound, but the distance between us had vanished like breath on glass. I turned and rode harder than I ever had before, bursting onto the road, heart hammering like a war drum. This time I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I knew she would be closer still. For 2 days after that second crossing, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay awake in the dim heat, the fan pushing stale air over my body, listening to the creaks in the house and the ticking of the wall clock. Even when I did manage to doze off, I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, certain I'd heard something small, something close. The night after I looked back a second time, I was brushing my teeth with the door open when I heard the back screen slide a few inches. Not slam, not creak, just the sound of it moving, deliberate, smooth, as if someone who'd opened it 1,000 times was slipping in quietly. I spat out the toothpaste and froze. My toothbrush still in my hand, I turned off the faucet and stepped into the hallway. The house was still. The door to the backyard was slightly open. Not wide, not enough for someone to walk through, but enough to let in a curl of humid night air. I stood there for what felt like minutes, just watching the door. Then I shut it, locked it, and pulled the wooden stopper across it for good measure. It had to be the wind. The screen might have been loose. Maybe it shifted when the house settled. It was old. Everything in this town was. Still, I began locking every door, even during the day. The next morning, I noticed something stranger. I was getting ready for work, adjusting my collar in the mirror when I smelled it. Incense, not the cheap kind from the convenience store. This was heavy, almost bitter, with a smoky floral note that reminded me of temples or funeral altars. I walked from room to room, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. It didn't seem to come from outside. My windows were closed, and the neighbors were far enough away that I wouldn't smell theirs anyway. It wasn't strong. Just there, like the memory of a scent. I checked under the sinks, the attic hatch, even the corners of the tatami mats. Nothing. But that night it came again. Stronger. I lit my own incense to cover it up, green tea scent, but it didn't mask the bitterness. It just blended. I told myself it could be psychosomatic. Maybe I was imagining it because of everything I'd been told. I was a foreigner in a place steeped in traditions I didn't fully understand. Stories and rituals clung to the walls of this town like humidity, and maybe it was just getting to me. Or maybe that walk had opened something. The third night after the second encounter, I heard the tatami creak in the next room, just once. Not the kind of creak you get when the wood shifts. The kind that comes when a foot steps down. I sat perfectly still, my back against the wall, phone in hand, not breathing. I listened for a long time. I didn't hear another sound. No shuffling, no footsteps, just the faint buzz of cicadas through the paper-thin windows. Eventually, I got up. I opened the door slowly. The room was empty, but the smell was there again, stronger than ever, like someone had just finished burning sticks beside a grave. I didn't sleep in my room that night. I curled up on the futon in the kitchen, facing the entrance, every light on. I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore, at least, not entirely. Something had changed. The house didn't feel like mine, not fully. It wasn't just the odd smells or creaking wood. It was a presence, like someone standing just behind the curtain, watching, waiting. I started asking around again. Nothing direct, just small questions, casual. I mentioned the smell to one of the younger teachers, Sugimoto-san, and he froze for half a second before saying, "Ah, yes, some homes here retain the scent of the past. Incense sticks used for honoring the dead. It's part of the wood. The wood. Always the wood." The same excuse. I stopped pressing, but I noticed the change. People no longer lingered when they saw me walking by. Conversations would pause when I approached. The students stopped waving at me after class. Some of the older villagers turned to avoid me entirely. Even Mrs. Hoshino had changed. When I stopped by her store for groceries, she didn't meet my eye. She placed my change on the counter instead of in my hand. I asked, gently, "Is something wrong?" She smiled too quickly. "No, Gabriel-sensei. Everything is fine. Just be careful, yes?" Then she slid a small bundle of white paper across the counter. "Salt," she said. "For the corners of your house. Sprinkle it when the moon is new, not before." I took it and nodded, though I didn't understand the rule. I didn't see her again after that. The days blurred. The school felt like a different place. I went through the motions, but even the students seemed uneasy around me. One boy, usually talkative, wouldn't meet my gaze during a lesson on possessives. When I gently asked him if everything was okay, he just said, "My grandmother told me not to talk to people followed by grief." I didn't know what to say to that. After school, I walked home slowly, avoiding Widow's Lane without thinking. That night, something changed again. I was in the kitchen making miso soup when I heard it, the quiet slide of the back door. This time, I knew it had been locked. I walked toward it, carefully. The lights were on. Everything felt too bright, too exposed. The wooden stopper had been pushed aside, from the inside. I opened the door. Nothing, just the garden, and the rice fields beyond, hazy in the moonlight. But when I looked down, I saw it, a wet footprint, small, bare, pressed into the wood of the Ingawa, as if someone had just stepped out of the rain, but there had been no rain. The footprint disappeared by morning, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I had stared at it for 10 full minutes, heart hammering, while every light in the house glowed around me like a trap. I began leaving offerings, just small ones, a cup of tea by the door, a rice ball, a stick of incense. Even though the smell made my skin crawl now, I didn't pray. I didn't know what to say. I just placed them there and waited. The tea was always cold by morning, the food untouched, but the incense always burned down to ash. At school, things got worse. The other teachers barely spoke to me anymore. One of the third-year girls burst into tears when I entered the classroom. Another left a drawing on her desk by accident. Stick figures, one clearly me, standing in front of the classroom. Behind me, in heavy black crayon, was a woman in funeral clothes with no face. I kept it in my desk drawer. The next night, I tried something different. I lit incense in each corner of the house. I left every door open so I could see every room at once. I kept a flashlight in my lap and waited on the futon with my back to the wall. I watched the smoke curl. I told myself it was just to prove that nothing would happen, that she wasn't here, that I hadn't really brought anything back with me. But around 2 a.m., the light in the hallway flickered. Just once, not off, just a dip, the kind that makes your breath catch. And then I heard it again, tatami creaking, not from the hallway, from inside the room beside mine, just one soft step, then another. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I felt it then, not just fear, but grief. A weight behind the air, the crushing sensation of sorrow so thick it made my chest tighten, like being at a funeral where you didn't know the deceased but were expected to cry. I didn't check the room. I waited until the sun rose, and when it did, the incense I'd placed in the four corners had burned clean, all four, even the one by the back wall where no draft should have reached. Something was in the house, and it wasn't leaving. By the end of the week, I'd stopped trying to explain any of it away. I didn't tell myself it was the house settling or a stray cat on the Angawa. I didn't try to reason with the scent of incense or convince myself it was in my head. Something was in the house. Something had followed me back, and each night it pressed in closer. I couldn't say why that Saturday felt different. The weather hadn't changed, still thick and breathless, but the silence had. It was heavier, like the weight of a conversation no one wanted to start. I spent the day cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because I had to keep moving. Swept the floors twice, washed all the linens, rearranged the entryway shoes. I even scrubbed the drain in the shower, something I'd avoided for weeks. When the sun dipped behind the hills, I forced myself to sit outside with a can of beer, watching the rice paddies sway in the faint breeze. The crickets were out. A good sign, I thought. Life meant nothing else was near, but something was wrong. It wasn't anything I could see at first, just a stillness that didn't belong. I looked out over the field behind the house, the one with the tall irrigation mound where I sometimes saw wild birds land in the morning. She was standing there, not moving, not facing me directly, but I could tell by the tilt of her head that she knew I was watching. The same black kimono, the same veil. Her arms were down at her sides now, not folded, not solemn, just hanging, like she'd grown tired of ceremony. The distance was about 20 meters, close enough to see her figure, far enough that I could pretend it was someone else, just a villager, maybe even one of the elderly women from down the road, but I knew it wasn't. I didn't move. I sat there, beer in hand, breathing too quietly. She didn't come closer, didn't wave or tilt her head, just stood there, her body subtly outlined by the rising mist of evening. After 10 minutes, I went inside. I locked the door. I turned off the lights. I sat in the middle of the room and waited, heart pounding so loud I could feel it in my teeth. I waited for her to come to the door, to slide it open, to stand in the doorway with that veil dripping over her face. But nothing came. When I finally crept to the window and peeked through the screen, the field was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor until the sun rose, wrapped in a blanket, flashlight pointed at the entryway, waiting for her to appear. She never did. But something inside me changed. That had been my house, my land, my line in the sand, and she had stepped over it. That Monday, I went back to school. I thought about taking a few days off. I looked up the number for the school's regional coordinator, hovered over the call button for 10 full minutes. But what would I say? I think a ghost followed me home. They warned me not to walk down a path, but I did, and now something watches me. I didn't even know the Japanese for half of it. Instead, I walked through the school gate like everything was normal. The teachers didn't greet me. The principal gave me a short nod and turned away. Even the cleaning staff, normally chatty and warm, kept their heads down. In the hallway, I passed one of the fifth-year classes. A little girl named Riko broke away from the line as they filed past. She tugged on the hem of my sleeve. "Sensei," she whispered, "why is the sad lady behind you?" My blood ran cold. I crouched, tried to smile. "What do you mean?" "She wears the black dress," Riko said, glancing behind me. "With the curtain face. Do you see her now?" Riko's brow furrowed. She looked past me again, then shook her head. "Not now, but she was walking behind you at the gate." I swallowed. "You're very observant, Riko-chan." She nodded. "Mama says not to talk to people who carry ghosts, but I like your class." Then she ran off to join the others. I stood in that hallway for a long time, staring at the empty lockers. Later that day, while collecting drawings after an art project, I found hers. It had my name at the top, Gabriel Sensei. A stick figure version of me stood in front of a house with square windows and a smile drawn in red marker. Behind me, nearly the same size, was another figure. Entirely black, no face, long arms, and a trail of red dots leading from her feet to mine. I folded the paper and placed it in my bag. At the end of the day, I lingered in the teacher's office. The others filtered out quickly. I stayed until the clock hit 6, staring at my lesson plan without reading a word. Eventually, I packed my things and walked out into the last of the sun. I didn't even glance toward the fork. My body knew better now. But when I got home, the front door was open, not wide, just slightly. I had locked it that morning. I remembered distinctly. 2 clicks, same as always. Inside, nothing was touched, no drawers rifled, no signs of forced entry. But on the tatami in the living room, perfectly centered, was a small komebitsu, a ceremonial wooden box. Not mine. Inside it, a folded piece of washi paper with no writing, just a single white kanamishi stone, smooth and round, like the kind left at graves. I threw it away, walked straight out the back door and hurled the box into the field. The stone followed. I didn't care who saw. Let them think I was losing it. Let them whisper. That night, I didn't eat, didn't bathe. I sat on the futon, arms around my knees, flashlight in my lap, waiting for the next noise. I didn't have to wait long. Just past midnight, I heard it, a soft sound, like wet cloth brushing the floor. It came from the hallway, slow, steady. Then the light in the kitchen flickered once. Then again. I turned on the flashlight, pointed it at the doorway. Nothing, but the smell was there. Not just incense this time, something older, like rainwater soaking into old wood. And beneath that, the iron tang of something rotting deep under the floorboards. I didn't investigate. I lay back against the wall and stared at the ceiling until dawn. When I finally went outside, I looked toward the backfield again. She was there, same spot, same stillness. But she was facing me now. I still couldn't see her face beneath the veil, but I could feel her eyes. And something worse, not anger, not menace. Sorrow, the kind of grief that hollows out everything around it. She didn't move, but I felt it in my bones. She wasn't waiting anymore. She had arrived. I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help, not really. But darkness felt like permission, like I was giving her something, like closing my eyes and it was an invitation to move closer. So I left the ceiling lamp on, the hallway bulb, even the stovetop light. Every outlet glowed dim and warm. I placed the futon in the center of the kitchen, as far from the windows and the tatami rooms as I could get. I stopped using my bedroom altogether, stopped closing doors. I didn't want to hear them slide. I couldn't bear that sound in the middle of the night anymore. I stopped locking them too. There wasn't a point. I'd hear the latch click at 2 a.m., and when I got up to check, it would be open again, always open again. The locks weren't broken. I tested them in the daylight over and over. They worked, they clicked, they held, until the sun went down. Then nothing held. At first I thought I was just being careless, too tired to remember locking up, too paranoid to trust myself. So I started taking photos. Every night before bed, I took pictures of each lock, each latch, door, window, the back screen. They were always secure. And in the morning, always open. Even the back door, which I began securing with string and tape and a sliding wooden bar. It didn't matter. I'd wake up and find the tape peeled, the string coiled neatly on the floor, the bar leaning gently against the wall. She wasn't breaking in. She was letting herself in. I tried pretending it wasn't happening. I tried keeping a routine. I taught classes. I smiled when I had to. I waved to students even when they didn't wave back. But my eyes were always drawn to windows, always checking reflections, watching doorways, listening. I couldn't focus. I'd forget what I was saying mid-sentence. One day I wrote the same vocabulary word 8 times on the chalkboard without realizing it. The students noticed, So did the staff. Mr. Tanaka finally pulled me aside after class. His face was pale, jaw stiff. He didn't look at me directly. "You should go home early," he said quietly. "You look unwell." I started to thank him, but he cut me off. "No," he said, "not here. Not your home here. Somewhere far, somewhere she does not know." I blinked. "You mean her?" He didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving his tea on the desk. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the floor in the middle of the house, knees pulled tight to my chest, every light on, flashlight in hand. And around 3 in the morning, I heard it for the first time, weeping, soft, distant, like someone mourning in the hallway, not wailing, not sobbing, just quiet weeping. The kind you hear at funerals when no one wants to disturb the room. I crawled to the edge of the wall and peeked into the hallway. It was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It didn't move either. It stayed in one place, just beyond the edge of the kitchen light, like someone had sat down outside the frame of my world and folded into grief. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move until the sound faded, gradually, like smoke thinning into nothing. In the morning, I searched every room. Nothing had been moved, but the smell was stronger now. That heavy incense soaked into every fiber of the house. I stopped eating properly. I didn't trust the food. I didn't trust the water. Every taste felt wrong, like I was swallowing something old, something meant for someone already gone. That week blurred. I couldn't remember what day it was anymore. I took time off from school, told them I was sick. No one asked questions, no one visited. I didn't leave the house once. The weeping came back the next night. This time it moved. I heard it slide past the kitchen, brushing the shoji with a soft rustle. I held my breath. The crying paused outside the bathroom, then outside the spare bedroom. Then it stopped completely. I waited. A full hour passed, and then something brushed the window. Just once, a single dry creak. I crawled across the floor and turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the rice paddy shimmered under a sliver of moonlight, and she was standing just beyond the glass. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My breath stopped halfway up my throat and sat there like a stone. She wasn't looking in, not directly. Her head was tilted slightly down, veil hanging, hands limp at her sides. She wasn't moving, but she was there, pressed close enough that her outline fogged the glass. I sat on the floor and watched her. My skin prickled with cold. She didn't knock. She didn't try to enter. She just stood there, a dark cutout against the soft motion of the patties. I don't know how long I sat there. The next thing I remember was light, morning, and the window was empty. I opened it, slowly, nothing outside, but the wood beneath the sill was wet, like someone had rested their head there for hours. That's when I started trying to block the windows. I tore up old newspaper, taped it across the glass. I draped blankets over the back door, covered the vents. It didn't help. The lights began flickering every night now, not randomly, rhythmically, as if synced to breath. On, off, pause, on, off, flicker. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the dark between flickers. Nothing definite. Just the sense of someone passing behind the door, or kneeling at the threshold. One night I shut off the lights to try and catch her in full. I thought if I saw her clearly, maybe I'd understand. Maybe I'd stop being afraid. I turned off everything, sat in silence, and the moment the last bulb went dark, the weeping started. Louder this time, closer. Inside the house, I ran for the switch, fumbled with the wall. The light came back on. There was nothing there, but my phone had taken a photo. It must have been accidental, a press of the volume key in the panic. When I opened the gallery, my hands shook. The photo showed the kitchen in darkness, lit only by the dim glow from the stove light, and in the far corner, crouched by the cabinet, was a figure in black, head bowed, hands curled around her knees, veil drooping. I deleted it. Then I threw the phone into the sink and turned on the water. I couldn't bear to see her again. The worst part, I think, was the grief. It wasn't just mine. The more she appeared, the more I felt it. Her sorrow, thick and slow and ancient, like every tear she shed was sinking into my skin. One night, I woke to find I had been crying in my sleep. No nightmare, no dream, just tears streaming down my face, soaking the pillow. I wasn't sad, not exactly, but something inside me had broken open, and it hadn't closed since. Every morning I walked through the house checking the locks I hadn't touched. Every night they'd be open again, and each time I heard her weeping. It was closer. I think she was waiting for something, or maybe she was just patient. I stopped going outside during the day. I didn't care anymore who noticed. If the neighbors talked, if the school cut my contract short, I had enough cash in the drawer to last for a while, and time had started losing shape anyway. Days bled into one another like ink on wet paper. All I could think about was the weeping, the open doors, the wet wood under the window, and her standing in the field, standing outside, standing closer. The night I found her at the window had changed something, not in her, in me. There was no more pretending, no more rationalizing, no more maybe. She was there, and she wasn't leaving. So I started looking for someone who might tell me the truth. Not the teachers, not the principal. They'd already closed their doors. Not the students, God, especially not them. I remembered a woman I'd met once at the shrine near the forest, maybe my first week in town. She sold charms and little prayer tablets with soft hands and eyes like melted glass. Her name was Sayuri-san. Everyone called her Oba-chan, even adults. She had to be close to 90. She lived at the far edge of the village, in a narrow wooden house behind a wall of hydrangea bushes. I walked there just after dusk, while the sky still had a trace of light. I wasn't brave enough to wait for dark. I don't think I would have gone at all if I had. She answered on the second knock, as if she'd been expecting me. "You should have come sooner," she said, not unkindly. I stood there, unsure if she meant that literally or in the larger, more terrible sense. She motioned me in with a soft wave and closed the door behind me. Her home smelled of dried flowers and dust. The lights were dim, yellow, not flickering, safe. I didn't waste time. "She's following me," I said. "The one from the path, the morning woman." Sayuri-san stared at me unmoving. "I saw her when I walked the lane," I continued. "They told me not to, but I didn't believe it. I saw her, I looked, and now she's..." My voice cracked. "She's in my house." Sayuri-san didn't interrupt. She started far away, just watching. Then the doors stopped staying shut, the smell, the weeping. And now, she's right outside, sometimes inside. "I don't know what she wants." Sayuri-san finally spoke. "You look back?" I nodded. "Only once. That's all it takes," she said. She moved slowly to a cupboard and pulled down a thin, cloth-wrapped bundle. She unrolled it across the low table. Faded parchment, old ink, brittle with time. A drawing, maybe 100 years old, showing the same road I had walked every day. Widow's Lane. And on it, near the end of the path, was a woman in black. No face, just a smudge of ink where the head should be. She was a real woman once, Sayuri said. Her name is gone now, but the story remains. She lived in this valley during the war, many, many years ago. Her husband was conscripted like many others. She waited. Every day she walked to the edge of the paddies to watch the road. I stared at the drawing. The ink was warped by time, but the grief in the image was undeniable. She became pregnant while he was gone. The village grew suspicious. Rumors. They called her disloyal, a whore. They spat on her when she passed. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She kept waiting," Sayuri said. "The baby came early. It died. She was buried with it." I felt a dull pressure in my stomach. "And the husband?" "Never returned. Perhaps he died overseas. Perhaps he abandoned her. No one knows." She paused. Her fingers traced the edge of the parchment. But the mourning never left that path. Her grief soaked into the earth. It became part of the road. I nodded slowly. "And now, she waits." Sayuri folded the cloth back over the drawing and tied it tight. "She is not angry. She is not vengeful. But she is lost. A grief like that does not fade. It waits for recognition." "Recognition?" If you see her and do not turn, she cannot find you. You are just another man, walking. I felt cold spread through me. But if you look, she said gently, you become part of the story. You acknowledge her sorrow. And once you do, she follows. She cannot let go of the one who saw her. My mouth was dry. So there's no way to... No, she said, already shaking her head. There is no ritual, no talisman, no priest. You are the offering now. I sat back, breath catching in my throat. Then why did no one say anything? Why doesn't anyone talk about it? She met my eyes then for the first time. Because if we talk about her, she hears. I didn't speak, neither did she. Only the cicadas outside dared to break the silence. She stood and poured 2 cups of tea. Mine trembled in my hand. I want to leave, I said. I want to go back to Tokyo. I can't live like this. Sayuri didn't answer immediately. Then she said, you may go. The road will not stop you. I looked at her. But she will follow, even if I leave the country. She does not care for borders. Her grief is not buried in soil. It is buried in you now. I left before full dark. Sayuri gave me a small white charm tied with black thread and told me not to place it near mirrors, windows, or water. I nodded, though I didn't understand why. I placed it on my kitchen table when I got home, left it there, didn't speak to it, didn't pray. That night she wept again, longer, lower, as if she had all the time in the world. I dreamed of the lane, not walking it, but standing in the middle of it, facing both directions, and no matter which way I turned, the field stretched on forever. She was not in the dream, but I felt her beside me, breathing, waiting. I left without telling anyone. No letter, no message to the school, no warning to the landlord or the neighbors or Sayuri-san. I packed a bag at 4 in the morning while the house was still and silent, as if even she was caught off guard. I brought only the basics: wallet, change of clothes, phone charger. I didn't dare open the closet or check under the futon. I didn't want to know if she'd made a space for herself in there too. I stepped into the humid pre-dawn air and didn't look back. I didn't lock the door either. Let it rot. The first train came just before 6. I boarded the earliest one heading toward Tokyo, changed lines 3 times, and finally checked into a business hotel off a crowded side street in Shinjuku, one of those beige concrete boxes with numbered rooms and vending machines on every floor. I picked it because it felt completely opposite to everything I'd been living in for the past few months. Sterile, no tatami, no wooden floors, no sliding doors, no view of rice paddies. The clerk barely looked at me as I handed over my ID. He didn't comment on my shaking hands or the sweat dripping from my neck, just slid me a key card and pointed toward the elevator. The first thing I did when I got inside was lock the door, twice. Then I opened every drawer, checked the closet, pulled back the curtains. No rice fields, just the side of another building. I turned on the TV, static, switched it off, sat on the edge of the bed and listened. No weeping. No creaking wood, no incense. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe. I showered and stood under the hot water for nearly 40 minutes, scrubbing every part of my skin like I could wash her off me. When I stepped out, the mirror was fogged over completely. I didn't wipe it. I lay on the bed, still damp, the air conditioning humming over my body, and I slept. For the first time in what felt like years, I slept. When I opened my eyes, it was night again. The room was dark except for the faint blue light of the TV standby LED. I sat up slowly, waited. No sound, no footsteps, just the hum of the AC and a muffled car horn outside. I laughed, not loud, just a single breathless sound. I thought, maybe I'd done it. Maybe I'd escaped. That woman at the shrine said she would follow, but maybe grief can't stretch that far. Maybe cities dissolve curses. Maybe this was all in my head to begin with. I ordered delivery from the front desk, a lukewarm bento I barely tasted. I flipped through the TV channels, garbage game shows, celebrities laughing at nothing. weather warnings for some southern prefecture. Everything felt normal again, until I lay back down. That's when I noticed it. A faint scent in the room. Familiar. Too familiar. Bitter smoke and dried flowers. Incense. It wasn't strong, just a trace, like the afterimage of a scent. But it was there. I sat up, swallowed. It had to be my clothes. Maybe they'd absorbed it from the house. Maybe it was still on my skin. I got up, checked the closet. Empty. Checked the bathroom, the sink, the hallway. Then I looked at the door. The lock was undone. I know I had turned it. I know it had clicked. But now it hung open, the deadbolt sticking slightly out, as if it had been twisted slowly, gently, from the inside. I pressed it back into place. My hands were trembling again. No more games, no more waiting. I needed someone to talk to, someone to confirm I wasn't unraveling. I dressed and went down to the front desk. There was a young man working, college-aged, bored, face lit by his phone. I asked casually, "Have any strange smells been reported? In the rooms?" He looked up. "What kind of smell?" "Incense," I said. "Old, temple style. It's very specific." He tilted his head. No one's mentioned that. But maybe it's from outside." I nodded slowly, about to turn away. Then he added, "You and your girlfriend checked in together, right? Sometimes perfume mixes weird with AC." I stopped. "My girlfriend?" He blinked. "Yeah, she was with you. The woman in black?" I stared at him. I checked in alone. He looked uncomfortable now. "Oh, sorry, I just assumed. You were talking to her. She was standing right beside you." I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone dry again. "Was something wrong?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just forget it." I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed again, and stared at the door. The lock was still shut. The scent hadn't returned. But I knew she was here. Somehow, impossibly, she had come with me. It didn't matter where I went. She had never been tied to the village, or the lane, or the field. She was tied to me. I was the mourner now. I didn't sleep that night. The lights stayed on. And around 2 a.m. the weeping started. Not loud, not angry, just soft and broken and endless, right outside the bathroom door. I didn't open it. I just sat still and cried with her. I didn't mean to return. I stayed in that hotel for 5 nights, 5 long silent nights. I switched rooms once just to test if it was tied to the space. But it wasn't. The weeping followed. The incense followed. I began leaving towels under the door, taping over the peephole, pushing chairs in front of the closet, not to stop her, just to measure her, to know what would be moved when I woke up. She always moved them, never violently, just rearranged. On the 5th morning, the chair was placed beside my bed, facing me. That's when I realized the city didn't matter. The distance didn't matter. She wasn't in the house back in the village. She was with me, so I went back. It wasn't surrender. It was resignation. I didn't tell anyone I was returning. I bought a ticket at the counter, no reservations. I didn't want to give her any more structure to follow. I had this stupid idea that maybe, just maybe, if I didn't give her a path, she'd lose mine. The train ride was silent. I didn't read. I didn't look out the window. I sat perfectly still, eyes on the floor, like a child afraid of waking something in the dark. When I arrived in Minatomura, the sun was low. The air was warmer than I remembered. The crows sat on the wires, unmoving, black silhouettes that looked less like birds and more like warnings. No one was waiting. No one spoke as I walked from the station to my house. I found the front door still slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. Inside, everything was untouched, but that made it worse. It didn't feel like time had passed. It felt like I'd never left. The only difference was the smell. It was stronger now, not just incense, but rot, wet earth, something sour beneath the smoke, like grief that had begun to mold. I stood in the entryway for a long time, bag still slung over my shoulder. Then, slowly, I walked through each room. My futon was made. The kitchen was clean. The doors were shut, but nothing felt empty. That first night back, I sat in the center of the main room and didn't move. The footsteps began at 1 a.m. Not heavy, soft, careful, like bare feet across old tatami. I listened as they moved behind the walls, slid along the floorboards, passed behind the thin paper screens. She didn't knock. She never did. The presence didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. I didn't sleep, and the next day I stopped pretending to live like a normal person. I blocked out all the windows, nailed blankets over the back doors. I burned salt in bowls in every corner. I visited the temple near the edge of the village and begged a priest I could barely understand to bless a string of juzu beads. He didn't ask why. He didn't look me in the eye. He just handed them over and said, "Don't speak her name aloud." "I don't know her name," I replied. "Good," he said. Back home, I hung them around the frame of my futon. I took to sleeping on the floor again, though sleep wasn't the right word. I'd lie there for hours, lights off, flashlight in hand, trying to stay conscious as long as possible. Every blink felt like a risk, every breath an invitation. The weeping returned. But now, it came from inside the room, never in the center, always from just behind something. A shelf, a curtain, a door I hadn't opened. Sometimes I'd hear the rustle of her kimono brush the floor as she shifted weight, and once, just once, I swear I felt her pass behind me, not touching, but near enough that the hairs on my arms lifted, as if something cold and sorrowful had stirred the air. I tried not to move. I tried not to breathe. The talismans did nothing. Neither did the salt. The juzu beads snapped after 3 nights, just popped in the middle of the night and scattered across the tatami like dry seeds. I didn't pick them up. I didn't move at all that night. Then came the futon. It happened on a Wednesday, I think. The days were harder to track now. I kept the phone off most of the time, and the light through the covered windows was always the same color. That night, I remember trying to hold out until dawn. I counted seconds in my head, got as far as 30,400 something before I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke, the room was quiet, still. My back was wet. At first, I thought I'd sweated through the futon, but when I reached behind me, my fingers brushed fabric, not my blanket, something cold. I sat up slowly. The futon beside me was sunken. The indentation was clear, a depression in the shape of a body, narrow and curled, head slightly turned as if facing me while I slept. It was wet. The sheets beneath were damp. The tatami glistened where her weight had pressed down. I stood and stepped back, stomach rolling, breath short. There were no footprints, no trail, just that one shape pressed beside mine, like she had lain there all night, watching. I didn't touch it. I didn't try to clean it. I sat in the corner of the room until morning, and even then I didn't open the windows. What was the point? She didn't need permission anymore. She had moved in. She had always been moving in. By that weekend, I stopped cooking. I stopped cleaning. I lived on bottled drinks and crackers. The fridge light had begun flickering. Sometimes I'd open it and find the milk slightly warm, though the temperature never changed. At night, I'd hear sliding, closets, drawers, the bathroom door opening just a crack, and always the weeping. Sometimes I imagined it was getting closer. Sometimes it sounded farther, but I knew better. It wasn't moving at all. It was me. I was circling her now. The weeping no longer stopped. Before, there were pauses, gaps in the night where I could pretend to sleep, where I could breathe. Now, it started with dusk and continued until dawn, constant and slow, like an open wound that never clotted. There were no more footfalls, no more shifting doors or fluttering fabric in the hallway, just the sound of someone quietly mourning, from the next room, from behind the wall, from somewhere in the dark I could never reach. Sometimes I wondered if she was sitting across from me, crying into her hands just a few feet away, and I was too afraid to look. I stopped using the flashlight, stopped searching. I let the rooms go dark, let the blankets stay unwashed, let the dishes pile up in the sink. If she was mourning, then I would mourn with her. The grief had soaked everything. It wasn't fear anymore. It was weight. dull and slow, pressing on every part of me until even blinking felt like a decision. She hadn't just followed me, she had pulled me into her sorrow, into her story. I didn't check the calendar anymore, didn't look at the clock. Day and night had become flavors of the same silence. When the electricity began to fail, I wasn't surprised. First it was the hallway light, clicking off by itself whenever I walked past. Then the bathroom bulb, which dimmed each night a little more until it barely gave off a glow. The ceiling light in the kitchen flickered whenever I looked directly at it. And then, one night, it all stopped. No hum, no light, just darkness, thick and honest. I lit candles, not for comfort, for necessity. I kept one in every room now, not because I thought she feared the light, but because I wanted to see when she finally came. And she would. I knew that now. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't punishment. This was a conclusion, a slow, inevitable one. The night it happened started like all the others, thick with the scent of incense, wet to Tommy beneath my bare feet, the steady drone of her weeping curling into the corners of the house. But something was different. It was louder. Not screaming, not even sobbing, just closer, less muffled, as if the weeping was no longer behind the door, as if it was in the same room. I sat on the floor, candlelight wavering, shadows trembling on the walls. I didn't move, didn't speak. The cry changed then. For the first time it hitched, a break, a pause in breath like someone holding back a sob that had finally forced its way free, and then silence, total. Complete. I held my breath. The flame of the candle bent sideways as if something had passed just beside it. And then, finally, I looked. She stood across the room. Not far at all. Her kimono was heavy, thick with moisture, dragging slightly behind her like something pulled from a well. Her hands hung limp at her sides. The veil was thinner now. I could see the faint outline of a face behind it, not a corpse's face, not a monster's, just a woman's. And she was crying. No sound now, no motion, but her shoulders trembled, and from beneath the black lace, tears fell, not fast, not exaggerated, just slow, steady drops that darkened the fabric below. I stood. My knees were stiff, numb. She didn't move. Her head remained bowed. The candle sputtered. I stepped forward, only once. Her eyes lifted. I stopped. Behind the veil, I saw them. Gray and bottomless, not cruel or empty but grieving, like deep water that remembered the people who had drowned in it. I opened my mouth to speak. No words came. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood there, weeping silently. I tried again. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I thought it would change something. Maybe I just wanted to be heard. She didn't react, didn't move, but something in the room shifted. The grief deepened. The candle went out. Darkness fell like a curtain. I backed up slowly, hand outstretched, trying to find the wall. The air was wet, thick with her presence. And then the power returned. The overhead light buzzed and flickered on. She was gone, not vanished. Gone, as if she'd never been there at all. But the damp spot where she stood remained, a faint dark circle on the floor, already drying. I called the town's emergency line. The operator answered after 4 rings. I gave my name, my address. "I need help," I said, my voice trembling. "There's someone in my house. She's been here for weeks. I can't, please, just send someone." There was a pause. Then the line clicked. I tried again. No answer. I called the school. No answer. I called Sayuri-san's number. Disconnected. I threw the phone across the room. It didn't break, just bounced once on the tatami and lay there, screen dark. I ran to the front door and pulled it open. The night air was thick with summer fog. The moon hung low, a pale smear above the hills. No one was outside. The village was silent. Lights in other houses glowed, but no windows opened. No shadows moved. I stepped out barefoot. The street felt hollow underfoot. "Wrong!" I shouted. "Help! Please, someone help me!" Nothing, not even an echo. And then, from inside the house, I heard the weeping start again, louder, directly behind me. I turned. She was standing in the doorway, face tilted, arms at her sides, tears soaking the front of her veil. I backed away. My foot struck a stone, and I stumbled. No one came. Not a single curtain twitched, not a voice, not a dog. She stepped onto the Ingawa. Her bare feet didn't make a sound. I crawled backward, hands shaking, heart crashing in my chest. "Please," I whispered. "What do you want?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because I already knew. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want release. She just wanted to be seen. And now that I had seen her, fully, completely, and without illusion, there was no one else she needed. The streetlights flickered and went out, one by one. The rest of the world closed its eyes, and I was alone, with her. I don't know what I thought would happen when I left the house that morning. Maybe part of me believed that distance really could matter. That a plane, an ocean, a customs line could break what the countryside had chained to me. That if I got far enough, fast enough, she'd dissolve into the fog that brought her. I didn't pack, didn't clean, didn't even shut the door behind me. I left everything but the wallet in my pocket and the passport I hadn't touched in months. The air felt thicker than ever. Not hot, just wrong. Still, like the silence that follows after something collapses in another room. I walked through the village as if I still belonged there, though I knew by now that I didn't. People watched me from behind curtains. A child stood frozen outside a shop until her mother pulled her indoors without a word. No one spoke to me. No one stopped me. Even the train station clerk didn't ask questions when I paid in cash and asked for the next available seat to Tokyo. The train was cold and overlit and blessedly loud. I sat in silence as vending machine jingles played between stations and conductors made polite announcements that I couldn't hear over the blood in my ears. The landscape moved too quickly to feel real. I didn't blink. I didn't look behind me. Not once. I arrived in Tokyo before dusk. I didn't check in anywhere. I didn't eat. I went straight to Haneda Airport, dragging my feet like I might wake up if I moved too quickly. The departures board blurred before me, all destinations meaningless. I picked one at random, San Francisco, the first flight that had open seats and left tonight. I didn't have a plan past that. I just needed out. At the counter, the airline worker gave me a tired smile. "Are you traveling alone?" I hesitated. I don't know why I hesitated. "Yes," I said. She nodded, printed the ticket, handed me my boarding pass and passport with a bow. I waited at the gate like a statue, eyes on the floor, listening to the sounds of people. Families, business travelers, bored teenagers scrolling through their phones. Normal, alive, unafraid. The kind of noise I hadn't heard in months. I let it wash over me, convincing myself I was part of it, that I could be part of it. When they called for boarding, I was first in line. I walked down the jet bridge with my boarding pass in my hand, heart crawling up my throat. I could almost feel her there, right behind me, breathless and slow. I didn't turn around. On the plane, I took my seat by the window, 38A, economy, middle of the wing. The aisle seat beside me stayed empty, for a while. Then a woman stepped into the row. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. She simply sat in the seat beside mine, her movements slow and deliberate. She wore black, not a veil, not a kimono, just a plain coat, long sleeves, pale hands folded neatly in her lap. I stared straight ahead, throat dry, vision tunneling. The plane took off. The seat beside me remained occupied. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. Halfway through the flight, I must have spoken. I don't remember what I said. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was her name finally remembered. Maybe it was nothing at all. But I spoke, and that was enough. When we landed, 2 airport security officers met me at the gate. "Sir," one of them said gently, "we need to speak with you." I followed without resistance. They led me into a small white room with no windows and a round table. One of them sat with me. The other placed something on the table, a printed photograph, a still from the plane's in-cabin security feed. It showed me sitting in seat 38A, speaking softly, looking beside me, but the seat next to mine was empty. I didn't say anything. "What were you saying?" the officer asked. I didn't answer. "Who were you speaking to?" I stared at the photo. "Was there someone threatening you?" He tried. "You can tell us." I shook my head. They ran my name through their system, found nothing, no charges, no red flags, but I could see it in their eyes, the unease, the pity, the growing understanding that they weren't dealing with danger, they were dealing with damage. Eventually a doctor came in, then another, then a quiet conversation I couldn't hear from behind the door, and then the decision. I didn't fight it. They placed me in a hospital, somewhere on the edge of the city, clean, quiet, not the kind of place for screaming. The kind of place for silence, for long hallways and closed doors, and medication they said would help. But nothing helps. I sit in a white room with one window and one chair. She doesn't come at night anymore. She doesn't creak the floorboards or whisper behind the walls. She doesn't weep, because she doesn't need to. She's here now, always. She stands in the corner while I eat. She walks beside me in the garden while the nurses pretend not to notice. She sits in the chair across from me while I stare at the wall, her black coat draped perfectly, her hands folded like always. She never speaks, never touches, just watches. And when I close my eyes, I know she will still be there when I open them, grieving. Not for her, not anymore, for me. Because I am hers now. I acknowledged her, and there is no leaving that.